How's it going, guys? Welcome back to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Manny Maradiega here, and it's December the 10th, officially through Week 14 now, getting to the nitty-gritty part of the season where everything is pretty much, up for grabs, and there's a lot of high stakes everywhere. So a lot of exciting things are coming up, but not without talking and reflecting on what we saw over this past weekend. And we're going to start off with last night with the Cincinnati and Dallas game. Not the most, high stakes, even though I just said that, but still very exciting, very surprising, shocking, and we still had a lot of good performances just individually as well. So we're going to go into that. Also, later on in the show, talking about Week 14, there was a lot of big games that meant a lot, like the Vikings and Falcons game, a lot of consequences coming from that one. The Seahawks and Cardinals game as well, a division matchup there, and the Steelers and Browns game are all things that we're going to get to at some point in today's show, so make sure to stick around, but don't only stick around. If you want to get involved with the show and, let me know any questions, comments, or opinions you want to share during the show on any of the topics that we have coming up, please don't hesitate to do so, because your input is a big part of what makes this show great, and we thrive on your energy and insight. So if you want to get involved and, say something on any of our topics, there's an easy way to do that now, just by using the new Super Chat feature. You can use a new Super Chat feature by clicking the $ at the bottom of the chat box to send in your Super Chat. In this way, it guarantees that I see your message, I can put it out there, I can read it back out on the show, and, just take the conversation elsewhere. Just you guys adding to the conversation always makes the show a lot better. So go ahead and let us know what you're thinking. Hit the Super Chat button, and let's keep this show as interactive and as exciting as possible. Again, use the new Super Chat feature, click the $ at the bottom of the chat box, and get involved with the show. But we can go back now and start talking about what we saw last night in a Bengals and Cowboys game that, going into the game, you're looking at a 4-17 and a 5-17, and you're thinking, what can we expect out of this? What is there to look forward to, right? Because, the Bengals are almost out of it. The Cowboys are, again, pretty much out of it as well. So, initially this was looked at as one of the premier matchups, but I mentioned it yesterday how similar these two teams are. And, the records also were a reflection of that. But ultimately, in the end, I'm glad I tuned into this game, and I actually was watching most of the game for, the majority of the night to see the Cincinnati Bengals pull out a late victory last night over Dallas to snap their 3-game losing streak and also bring them to a 5-8 record, while Dallas, on the other hand, also becomes 5-8, but they obviously lose, but with a much more sour feeling, because if there was any hope of them ever making the playoffs at some point this season, I thought it definitely, ended last night with that loss. They pretty much needed to be perfect, and they were also going to have a lot of help on top of that. So not keeping up their end of things is definitely going to put a dent in their playoff hopes, definitely going forward. But for all the high-scoring, close games that Cincinnati has been involved in this year, this is only their second one-score victory this year. They've had 7 of their 8 losses this year be by 7 or less points this year, and they've obviously lost all of them. So to get one finally to go in their favor, I thought was a great reflection of not only this season, to kind of epitomize everything, but Joe Burrow mentioned it at the end of the game in the ESPN interview that they've really not had a lot of breaks this year. They've not had a lot of things go their way, whether it be injuries with Orlando Brown and Logan Wilson, obviously, or just things just like the ball not rolling their way, really, at the end of the day. So, I thought how he said that and the fact that I just read that out, I think really, shows what kind of season it's been for the Bengals. Frustrating, obviously, but I thought they definitely needed a win like they got last night. And also for Cincinnati, right, they were able to earn a victory with their quarterback, I just mentioned Joe Burrow, playing still at a very high level. Last night's game was the 4th consecutive game for Joe Burrow to throw, where he has thrown 300-plus yards and 3 touchdowns as well, joining only Steve Young, Patrick Mahomes, Peyton Manning as the only quarterbacks to do so, have 4 consecutive games with 300 plus passing yards and 3 touchdowns as well. But what kind of also, reflects on this season has been that those guys, when they were able to do that, they had records like 3-13, 12-4, and things like that. Whereas Joe Burrow this season obviously has a 5-8 record. So it's been the story of the entire season, right? How Joe has been and should be in the MVP conversations, but obviously they're probably not going to give it to him with that kind of record. So it's just another thing to add on to that, to kind of just show the missed opportunity that the Bengals have had this season. And for the Cowboys, on the other hand, the loss, I mean, it didn't mean much, in my opinion. Looking at this Cowboys team, I already, thought they weren't going to make the playoffs. But Dallas also lost arguably one of their best players, their most impressive player, I think, this year for me. Their linebacker, DeMarvion Overshown, to a knee injury. And Mike McCarthy and Jerry Jones said after the game that it looks pretty serious. I haven't seen any official word on the official diagnosis of it, but Overshown, he's in his second season currently, but he missed his rookie year with a torn ligament in his left knee, and now he injured his right knee last night. So you're hoping it's not anything too serious, but we're just going to have to wait and see, because DeMarvion Overshown, going into this season, I didn't really know too much about him, but it's hard to ignore him now because he does so much for them. He's everywhere, making tackles all over the field. And apart from Micah Parsons, I would say he's the most exciting player on, at least, definitely on the defense, if not on the entire team. CeeDee Lamb can make an argument as well, but it's you could say it's all 3 of those guys: Overshown, CeeDee Lamb, and Micah Parsons. So they got at least those 3 guys definitely guaranteed going forward for the foreseeable future. But in this game, CeeDee Lamb and Jamar Chase were 2 of the biggest stars, and they were the ones that got on the board first in this game, with CeeDee Lamb scoring a touchdown to start things off, and then Jamar Chase followed him up as well. And just I'm mentioning both of those wide receivers, and I got to mention how Jamar Chase finished the game with 14 receptions, 177 yards, and 2 touchdowns, where on the other side, CeeDee Lamb had 6 receptions for 93 yards, albeit playing with a backup, so still impressive numbers, but that there is a little asterisk, and a touchdown as well for CeeDee Lamb. Both of those guys definitely doing their part, and it's just a continuation of Jamar Chase and the kind of season he's also been having, right? Joe's having a great year, but Jamar also, could be in line for a triple crown, so that's great for the Bengals. Maybe not financially, but for the performances on the field, definitely does not shoulder any of the blame for much of the shortcomings this year for Cincinnati. But after those 2 guys got on the board, Dallas hit a field goal later on before Chase Brown eventually scored the second touchdown to give the Bengals a 14-10 lead. But Cincinnati would tack onto that as well right before halftime, and the Bengals took a 7-point lead into halftime. But it looked like at that point the Bengals were really in control. But in the second half, Dallas began to switch the momentum over to their side after they scored a touchdown. They managed to get an interception off of Joe Burrow on the following drive. Then a field goal finally gave them the lead. Now they're up by 3 points. The score was 17-20 at this point. But Cincinnati would ultimately respond with a field goal, and then we get to the most interesting part of the game, right? After a couple of punts by each team, that usually don't mean much, it came to the last punt of the game where Cincinnati was obviously punting after the Cowboys defense was doing very well. Overall, for the entire game, they were playing pretty well to kind of stop Cincinnati and their offense, and they forced them to punt with about 2 minutes left in the game. And to add on to Dallas's great performance, they actually blocked the punt. It didn't go backwards or anything, but it stopped the trajectory and the force of the punt. So it only really went maybe 10, 15 yards, if that. And, at that point, I've never played football, really, but, watching it, at that point, that if it touches anybody on the receiving team, it's a live football, obviously, right? So usually players, they think it's a grenade or something, so they just get away. They want nothing to do with it. They run away from it as far as possible because they don't want to mess it up. But in this particular instance, right, you can't make it up with the Dallas Cowboys and the kind of season that they're having. A player on their team, I think his name was Amarion Oruwariye. I know I got the last name right. It might not be his first name, but the last name is definitely right. He tried to field it for whatever reason, and it kind of just like went through his arm, and he obviously touched it. The Bengals fall on it, and they recover the ball at the most crucial point of the game, and obviously they go down and score through Jamar Chase. And I mean, it's those kind of things that happen in a season like this, right? The season can't end quick enough for the Dallas Cowboys in those kind of decisions and those kind of results as well. It's just been a pretty unbelievable season, but not in any sort of positive term. So, I mean, it just culminated last night. Micah Parsons was beside himself as well. If you guys remember his reaction, that's, I'm sure, how every Cowboys fan was reacting to not only the game, but just the entire season. For them to play pretty well on defense, for them to still lose a game like that where they put in a great effort with a backup quarterback, it definitely hurts. But, I mean, at this point, if they're not mathematically eliminated already, that definitely did it, at least from a morale standpoint. So, I mean, there's not much to say on the Cowboys, but on the Bengals, the last thing I will say for the Bengals is, in particular for Joe and Jamar Chase, I know it's hard to kind of give them any awards for, you know, the team record that they're obviously on, but I think they should get at least some consideration for Offensive Player of the Year or like MVP. I know Saquon and Derek and, you know, Josh Allen are kind of dominating those two categories. But, you know, Jamar Chase, I mean, Cooper Kupp got the Triple Crown and he won the Offensive Player of the Year. So, I mean, I'm not saying make one exception, like, you know, like you don't have to keep it fair, but, I mean, Jamar Chase is doing phenomenal things, and I think it would be a bit unfair pretty much to just say, you know, the record's bad, we're not even going to acknowledge him. Maybe make him a finalist or something like that. I think that would be the most fair thing to happen. But, I mean, they definitely should get some consideration for those awards, in my opinion. So we're going to move on from that game and start looking over, before we get to Week 14, there's been a lot of, you know, we talked about some of the drama with the Eagles yesterday about the game. Even though they won, there was still some backlash, some animosity in that locker room perhaps, and Brandon Graham only added to it with some of his comments. So I had to revisit it. We're going to talk about what A.J. Brown said again, Jalen Hurts, and Brandon Graham, and how he added to it, and just the overall thoughts on what we can make out of this going forward. So we'll be right back. You're listening to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast.